Welcome to the Tear Sheet Podcast. I'm your new host, Rabab Essen, Creative Director and Journalist at Tear Sheet. Today's episode adds to the growing array of stories we're telling about AI as part of our content series on the subject. Joining me on the show today is Citizen's Chief Data and Analytics Officer, Krish Swamy. If you want a system-wide view of what Citizens is doing in terms of AI, Krish is the best person to ask, as he's responsible for building the data foundation that makes AI implementations successful and also heads the firm's Generative AI Council. In our conversation, Krish gives us insight into how the bank is implementing GenAI in various departments like fraud and customer service, but he also pulls back the curtains from the strategies that are driving all of these implementations. Stay tuned for a conversation on how Citizens chooses its partners, how it manages AI governance and risk, measures ROI, acquires new talent, as well as a really funny anecdote on an innovative strategy the bank used to show its employees how approachable new tech like AI can be. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy the show. So, hi Krish. We have you here to talk about how Citizens thinking about generative AI and AI. And before we really jump in, could you start by giving us an introduction of who you are and what you do?
Sure. Nice to meet you, Rabab, as well. I'm Krish Swamy. I'm the Chief Data and Analytics Officer here at Citizens. Really responsible for everything that we need to be doing in terms of making access to data easy for our 18,000 plus colleagues. So how do you empower them to make better data-driven decisions? There's a lot of work that my team also does with platforms, creating reusable utilities and products which different analytic users can use for insight generation. And obviously, an important part of the agenda is everything that we do as a company in terms of AI and machine learning. I would say the machine learning field is not new. It's been around for the last 15, 20 years. But a lot of the work around generative AI is absolutely something that is fresh. And so making sure that Citizens is getting the most out of these types of technologies to be more impactful with its customers, to be more successful as a bank, to create better outcomes for our employees. I think all of those are goals that I have. Based in the San Francisco Bay Area, I'm not in the city. We live in the East Bay. We've been here for about the past 10 years, and prior to this, I was in a similar kind of lead analytics role at Wells Fargo. I spent about 8 years there, and where I really learned a lot of my skills in data analytics was my time spent at Capital One. Spent about 12 years there working through different areas of analytics in the card business, in digital and risk management. Have done all of my education in India. So I have an undergrad in electrical engineering and then an MBA. And I worked for a few years in consulting before coming over to the US.
So you have a really wide view of how this industry is thinking about, analytics and data and AI in general. And I know it can be weird to introduce yourself when you're being recorded. So I appreciate, you giving us the full view. Maybe we could just, zoom out a bit and start by, what role are technologies like generative AI playing in helping banks differentiate right now?
Yeah. So see, when we think about transformative technologies, there are obviously, I think, 3 or 4 different ones that come to mind. There's AI and machine learning. There is obviously things like generative AI. There's data itself. You could call it a technology, or you could call it an asset. I think there are different views. It's probably both. There is obviously things like digital. But I think overall, like I said earlier, I think it's about how do you generate great outcomes for our customers, right? I think I would argue any business deserves to be in business because it's providing a service for its customers. So if your customers aren't happy, then you've got no right to be in business. So how do we make sure our customer needs are met? whether it is somebody who is coming in through the branches, or whether it's someone coming in through the phone or the online channels, or whether it's a commercial clients that we go out and meet. Okay, so depending on any of those, how are they able to transact banking? How are they able to understand our products and services? How are they able to understand the state of their own financial accounts and status and so on? That's, I think, the primary area of differentiation. And what I've seen is that when organizations have that as a focus, you'll generally do well. Okay. Now, to be able to do that well, we clearly need to be empowered as for our employees. So I think that's where the employee angle comes in. So how do you make sure that the person who is interacting with the customer, either over the phone or in a branch, or as a corporate banker, that person is empowered with the best information that the customer needs to have. So I think that's definitely an area of differentiation. And last but not least, I think it's the investments and foundations. When we invest in data, and when we make data easily available, and when we teach people how to use data, I think they become a lot more effective at being able to self-serve in the next rounds. Okay, so creating that foundation, I think, is also an area of differentiation. The people who do it well will focus on those differentiating factors much more than others.
And could you give us looking at citizens, could you give us an insight into how citizens has been using like data and AI to sort of deliver better value to its customers?
Yeah, a big part of I think where we have focused is obviously working back from business problems to see how we can have that impact on the outcomes that we're trying to drive. Let me maybe illustrate that with a specific example around fraud. Okay, so fraud is a common problem across all banks. And what has happened since COVID is that fraud rings have gotten more active as people have moved a lot of their shopping habits online. Okay, so fraud definitely showed a spike in the 2021-2022 timeframe, and we are no different in terms of being impacted by some of those things. What we did was 3 or 4 different things. One, I think we've spent a lot of time on overhauling the fraud infrastructure and the fraud platform itself. Okay, so there are multiple kind of subcomponents around fraud detection, claims processing, case management, which all are parts of the overall fraud value chain. And we made investments to improve the quality of those platforms. In many cases, rebuild some of those platforms up from scratch. Part of the journey here was also making a wide range of data available to those platforms. So one of the other things that we've been doing as a company is moving to the cloud. We are almost 80% migrated to AWS, and we should be 100% by the end of 2025. So having all of that data together in one place makes it easier to get access to. And so we are able to bring better data when it comes to our fraud defenses. So that's the second thing. Third, how do you get the people who are working on fraud, the fraud analysts, a lot of the contact center people have access to that same data so that they are more effective in terms of being able to spot trends, take actions, come up with fraud mitigation strategies. So we have developed dashboards for people to be able to consume a lot of that data in an easy manner. And finally, we've also done a ton of investment on AI machine learning models. So as the need for fraud detection, fraud identification, and fraud prevention becomes more sophisticated, we've also invested in models which are built on our own data. Some of these are models that run real time, so they happen as a transaction is going on. Some of these are more batch-like models, which happen which run many times a day, or which run towards the end of the day. But what models do is that they are able to look across a very wide range of patterns and come up with some of the key predictive variables. Mm-hmm. So that has definitely been an area of investment for us as well. So yeah, I think, and I'm just giving the fraud example as an exemplar of things that we've done in other spaces. Same story with marketing, same story with credit risk, same story with deepening engagement. Similar with how do you grow balances with our customers? I think it's the same pattern, which is how do you invest in the right platforms, in the right decisioning platforms on the business side, and on the data analytics side, how do you invest in dashboards, the data foundations, and then AI machine learning models? So that's probably, hopefully it gives a sense of the types of things that you're doing. Can't be doing just one or the other. I think it's got to be a multi-pronged approach.
And I love the system view you have of the whole organization. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about was partnering. So you mentioned AWS, but as a tech leader, you are thinking about, what can we build ourselves and where do we need to partner? So how do you think about that strategy?
Yeah, great question. So, see, I think more than trying to decide whether we want to build it ourselves or have to build it externally, maybe the first thing that we think about is how do you make it more consistent across the entire bank. Okay, so take a machine learning platform, for instance. There are multiple teams that need the ability to have machine learning platforms. And it is conceivable that everybody then goes out and figures out their own thing. That would be a really bad outcome, because I think that would lead to proliferation of costs, that would lead to loss of control. That would not be, you would not have the ability to reuse learnings from one area and transfer them to another. So what we look for is more around consistency of platforms. Once we decide on that principle, whether we end up building it homegrown or whether we end up building it, or whether we end up buying the solution, I think it's more a function of is there a unique enough problem that we're solving internally, and so it needs a homegrown solution, or is it a generic enough problem that we can buy from the outside? I feel in most cases in banking, the answer is typically the latter. Okay, so you don't necessarily need to build homegrown solutions. What you do need to do is make sure those solutions are all integrated with all of the other solutions, okay, which is a lot of work for sure. Mm-hmm. The place where I think we certainly, and I'm sure there are other banks as well who think the same way, have spent a lot of time on homegrown solutions is on managing our data, on protecting our data, etc. I think those are the critical assets which are unique to us, which we would not be comfortable leaving completely in the hands of a commercial solution or a bought out solution. So those are the places where we tend to focus a little bit more on making sure that we understand what we are doing, we build the technologies ground up, and we become more effective at using those technologies.
It's a good answer. And as you were saying that, I was thinking about, just generative AI, and you gave us a system view of how you're changing things to have better capabilities. Just to help my understanding, could you give us a few examples or just mention areas where you are thinking of implementing generative AI or where it could be useful?
Yeah, absolutely. So any area which involves knowledge search is definitely a place where we've already had some success with developing and deploying generative AI solutions. So, typical problem, right? A customer calls up, they're asking a question about, how they need to complete a certain task. How do I put a hold on a payment that I've already initiated? How do I close a certain type of an account? For the common enough questions, the contact center agent typically has those answers typically at the top of their minds. Okay, so they're able to get to those answers really quickly. But a lot of the questions tend to be fairly narrow, fairly almost esoteric kind of questions, and they have to reference procedure documents, how-to guides to be able to give that answer. Now, the way this was done in the past was just using keyword search. Okay, and keyword search will help you narrow from, say, 3,000 plus documents and bring it down to 15 or 20 documents, but someone has to still go through those 15 or 20 documents to get to the answer.
Yeah.
What we've been able to do is using generative AI and teaching our agents how to prompt effectively, how can they get to some of those answers a lot quicker? Okay, so that's really one good example. A second example is in the software development phase. A lot of software development, and you mentioned that you have a computer science background, so you probably know a little bit about this. But good software development requires working on testing, working on documentation. Oftentimes, you're converting code from an older technology to a newer technology. So all of these are areas where and we use GitHub Copilot, but those are areas where we've been able to find just a lot of leverage from giving software development software engineers, the right tools to be able to do that. The testing, the documentation, sometimes even writing code, and become more efficient at that. The last thing I'll say there is that it's also about unleashing the same creative thinking in a lot of our people as they go about doing their day-to-day work, and making sure that they're able to actually think about problems they're trying to solve and not spend time doing busy work, doing paperwork kind of a thing. Okay, so one of the things I do as a practice is we have the ability to record internal calls and create summaries and transcripts and so on. It's amazing about the amount of productivity that you get out of something like that. Okay, you are just able to get the transcripts and then ask a few questions in terms of what are the key points that were discussed. Can you structure this in this kind of a framework? Can you define the action items and the next steps? What are some of the how do some of these ideas that we talked about in this call relate to these other things that we discussed via email? Bringing a lot of those things together is the type of thing that would take hours, okay, and that can be done now in seconds or minutes. Okay, so that's a big lift for all of us. So all of those three are areas that we are actively working on. Big roster of use cases going forward as well. So how do you take what you've taken from knowledge extraction for contact center employees? How do you extend it to everybody within the bank? So when let's say I go online and if I need to find out as an employee, I've got to find out what's going on with benefits, or is this part of medical treatment covered under my benefits plan? Yes, I could call up my insurance provider, but oftentimes the first place I'll go to is going internally and seeing what our plans are and so on. And instead of reading through 50, 60 pages of detailed plan documentation, having the ability to ask the question, get the answer back relatively quickly. What is leave policy? What happens? What am I supposed to do if I suffer a workplace injury? How do I how do I get the claims process started? How do I go on short-term versus long-term disablement? What are the pros and cons of that? I think those are the types of questions that employees have all the time, our colleagues will have all the time. And so we are extending that knowledge extraction solution that I just talked about to other areas, other document repositories as well.
So it's that efficiency piece that you're trying to extend not only to call center agents, but everyone internally.
Yes. And see, I think one of the bigger things that I think is becoming evident to us as we think about generative AI and as we start to use it in our day-to-day work, is that you've got to think of these things in a very transformative manner, right? You just cannot try and think about like point solutions. You've got to think broader. You've got to think more strategically, and and you've got to think more transformatively. And while those might sound somewhat cliche, I guess what I'm trying to say is, and the approach that we're taking is not just take a process, take a component within a process, and apply generative AI there. I think while that might be the starting point, the end game is always going to be, how does this function look very different 3 or 5 years from now? Okay, and how do we work towards that end game?
And you're ahead of me here because you've already mentioned some of the things that I had hoped to ask about employees, and I'll get to that. One of the things I wanted to ask you was, you already have these implementations in play, but how did you think about, ROI and oversight and governance for these things?
So let me start with the oversight and governance, and then let's talk about the ROI. One of the things that we were very clear about, literally from day one, was that before we start any effort, we need to have the right governance framework in place. Okay, so the way that happens is we start with a process called the Generative AI Council. Okay, and I chair the council. And we've got leaders from across the bank covering a lot of the risk and governance functions to be able to weigh in on new initiatives that come up. So everything that we do definitely starts with the council. Okay, and once the council gives a green light, and there have been a number of situations where we've said, we're not ready for this. This is duplicative to something that we already have, and so we've said, sorry, we're not going to go ahead with this. But once we get a green light, it falls into a lot of the standard processes that we have for assessing risk. Okay, so we have a model validation process. Okay, and so they look at it from a technical model risk standpoint. We've got technology boards for architecture and implementation that check for the solidity of those technology solutions. Finance obviously plays a role in terms of making sure that the right ROI is there and is present as part of the use case. Change management plays a role in terms of making sure that given that with generative AI, this is not really for machines, it's for humans. How do you make sure that the humans have the right training to be able to adopt and use some of these technologies? There is other types of risk like reputation risk, operational risk, etc., that also need to be assessed, and we have risk assessments for all new initiatives. So basically, any idea that we start, once it gets past the council, have to go through a gamut of these initiatives, and at the risk of if it sounds too excessive, this is exactly what we would do with any new thing. Okay, so even if you're, let's say, doing a very unrelated thing, let's say we're creating a new digital app, all of these steps that I just talked about would apply. And so in a sense, we're not doing anything special for generative AI. Having said that, I think what we are doing is making sure that we've got the right experts in those assessment conversations, people who've got the background when it comes to generative AI, to make sure that when there are nuances about how to address any one of those risks, you have the right experts around the table to be able to weigh in and give the right direction. So that's the approach when it comes to risk and governance. When it comes to ROI, again, at the outset, we define every use case as typically falling within 3 categories. You're either trying to do, it's either an efficiency play, and that could be either cost avoidance or cost reduction. Cost reduction is when you've got a certain cost today and you want to reduce that over time. Cost avoidance is when you suddenly have a large new nature of work that comes in, and we might need to grow our staff by a large number to be able to meet that work. So how do you avoid that? How do you get existing people empowered to do that work? So, cost reduction, cost avoidance is certainly one area. Growth is a really, really big thing. So how do you get to uh, better revenue growth for the company? How do you and all of that comes down to how are you able to market more effectively? How are you able to explain the products and services more effectively? How do you understand customer complaints and find ways to address things that are dissatisfiers? That's another big one. By the way, that's another generative AI use case that we are very actively working on, which is going through complaints, going through interactions that we've had with our customers to say, what are they dissatisfied with? What are the root causes? How do we change that? How do we address some of those root causes? Why I call that a revenue play is because when we do that, we are able to reduce churn. Okay, and when your customers are going to be there with you longer, they're going to be more interested in other products and services, and they're going to be interested in just greater longevity with respect to the bank. Okay, and so all of those are positive things for us. And the third area is risk management. So how do we predict risk better? How do we get narrower in terms of our risk prediction ability so that we're just more effective? How are we able to identify extreme outcomes better? Okay, so take credit risk. You have an outlook in terms of what credit risk is going to look like over the next 12 to 18 months, but how bad can it get? Okay, so there's an expected, how bad can it get? And there's if this and this happens, credit risk is going to be 40-50% higher. How do you do that with the right econometric model? So these are all areas which are very ripe for AI and data in general, and in many cases for generative AI. So that's the way we look at every initiative. What we also try and do above is for each of these initiatives, try and separate financial outcomes and, talk about both financial outcomes and operational outcomes. Okay, so a financial outcome might be we want to save so many dollars. Okay, we want to grow by so many dollars. But to be able to enable those financial outcomes, you start with operational outcomes. Okay, so how do you reduce the volume of calls that come in? How do you improve first-time resolution when the customer has an issue? How do you reduce the amount of time for us to identify a complaint and take action on it, right? These are more like operational outcomes. So you're measuring time, you're measuring frequency of certain things, you're measuring all of those things, and when you get those right, then the financial outcomes will follow. So we certainly keep an eye on both the operational outcomes and the financial outcomes.
You gave a very expansive answer, and honestly, it's kind of refreshing to see this measured look on generative AI because we cover this industry and there's all this hype surrounding this technology, but to hear, to go through the exact steps that you're going through, but have a measured approach, it's genuinely very refreshing. And you've mentioned, you did a good job of explaining how the smallest of processes impact the bottom line, and mentioned cultural and change management. So I wanted to come to that piece and talk about, you have these implementations and you're looking at ROI, but how do you train the people to be ready for this tech?
Yeah. So see, I'm a really, really firm believer that if you want somebody to adopt any new technology or any different way of working, you got to really spend time explaining the benefits of why we're doing it, and really explain it to people in a very relatable kind of way. So what we try and do there is we have training programs on a lot of our generative AI tools, but what we also try and do is showcase examples when people have done them in a very specific area. So, for example, let's say your what you do as a bank, what you do as a colleague is to create a newsletter, okay, and it informs people of corporate banking trends, right? How is the market doing? How is it done over the past week? What have been kind of big announcements in terms of, say, mergers and acquisitions? what are maybe bankruptcy filings that big industries have had, what is the macroeconomic outlook when it comes to consumer confidence or corporate confidence. This is the type of thing that all bankers would find useful. And so we typically have small teams of people who put together that kind of information. Now, there's obviously an opportunity to use generative AI to make a lot of those processes, a lot of that newsletter creation efficient. But then how do you showcase that so that someone else who's maybe doing a different kind of a newsletter? Okay, so suppose now let's say this is somebody who's talking about technology trends or somebody who's talking about generative AI trends, right? How do you get them to start to use and adopt that technology? I think the best motivator is when you can give these tools in the hands of the people, show them the possibilities, show them examples of people who have done it really well, celebrate those successes. I think those are ways in which we get people excited about using the technology. There will there will always be the room for leaders like myself to go and talk about how we are doing some of these things. But when leaders model the way, I think it starts to make a big difference. So one of the things that we did last year, so last year we had our first internal data and analytics conference. It's called Data Pulse. And we had two of our senior leaders there, our general counsel and our head of enterprise experience. And they actually got on stage and they did a modeling throwdown where for like 40 minutes, they started with the data set and built a machine learning models. Okay, so this was seen live by close to 200 people and online by close to 500, 600 people. So when you've got leaders getting on the stage and doing those kind of things, showing how easy it is to use the tools, and there was some trash talk that the two of them did, which I thought came out really, really well. It makes it very obvious that we're not just talking about technologies, we're willing to live it, and people just walk away feeling very motivated about how the company is thinking about technology. So that was exciting. So it's really about building that excitement, bringing tangible examples that I think is going to be the difference maker.
I was in all of those tech classrooms and I could never think that making those models would ever be fun for people to watch. I'm so glad that has happened.
It has become a lot easier. You're absolutely right. Again, building a model is ultimately it's a fairly technical, fairly detail-oriented kind of work. So I wouldn't take any of those models that my leaders built and put them into production. Hell no. Having said that, though, I think it makes it obvious for people as to this is not some hard to access, difficult to get hold of technology. It's there, people can use it. Obviously, I think we need to have the right guardrails when we actually start to apply it for something serious, which is customer impacting. But you have the tools for people to get started, and that's how people learn. So
really shines a light on the black box of AI then.
Right, right.
And I wanted to turn your sights on talent acquisition now. So, I mean, I guess the requirements of what people need to do and what they need to learn has changed a bit and probably will change more in the next 5 to 10 years. So how are you thinking about, what talent we need as citizens?
Yeah. So you're right. See, when it comes to data and analytics talent, the expectations in terms of what people know is changing. For example, 10 years ago, I would have argued that you needed to be really, really strong at programming, okay, for having a data science job. It's probably less the case today. And what you need to better understand is maybe how different systems and how different applications connect with each other. And maybe 5 years from now, it's going to change again, where it's going to be a lot more about how people can use tools that are already out there. However, I think what is common, what doesn't change at all, is a few things. One, you need to have curiosity to be able to understand business equations and see, what is needed to be able to solve those equations. You need to be collaborative. Okay, any AI work, any data science work is always a team sport. Okay, and so you're working with people from different backgrounds, business users, risk and compliance people, engineers, data scientists. So you've got to know how to collaborate and work well with people. You've got to be a problem solver at heart. Okay, so you need to be able to be somebody who is going to, take on a problem, unpack it, look at it from different angles, ask questions which others may have not thought about asking. Right? I think those are some of the key aspects that we look for when we look at our hiring. One of the things that I think we've been very successful at doing, especially, and this is true for college level hiring that we do, is that we get a lot of people coming in who go through internships. They spend 8 to 10 week period in the summers going through internships. They are a big success because they get a sense of how the company culture is, and it's a, and I've been here for a short time, so I can't really and so it's for me a very early take on what the culture is, but it is truly a very collaborative culture. People really want to get together and do the right thing. Okay, people are very open when you have suggestions or areas of improvement. So it's a great culture. So people get to experience that culture. We get to see how they collaborate, how they work together as part of a team, etc. So that, I think, is a great way for us to be able to get an early read on potential talent and bring them in. But again, going back, I think the bigger things that we will look for is always, do you know how to solve problems? Do you show curiosity? Do you collaborate? And do you have, obviously, the right technical skills to back all of that up? So.
Thank you for that very expansive look at what Citizens is doing in AI. I mean, you went through ROI, culture, infrastructure, and I didn't even notice where the time went. But thank you for being on the show, Krish. It was lovely having you here, and I'm glad that we had this talk. I feel like I'm leaving with a better understanding of what you're doing.
Awesome. No, thanks for the opportunity, and thank you for having me on and being able to share, I think, what we're talking about. One of the, I know one of the questions that you had talked about was, how does a bank differentiate itself? What are we doing to make Citizens an attractive place to work? And what I think I've experienced is that, more than other things, more than compensation, more than industry, what people really care about is doing valuable, exciting work. Okay. Especially people in the data analytics space. So when you give them an environment where you're doing exciting work, people are going to be drawn to it. And that reputation is just built up through conversations such as this. Okay. So so thank you for helping us get the word out. We are doing a ton, but we're just right at the start of the runway and the plane has just started rolling. Okay, so there's a lot more to do for us to go down the runway, take flight, achieve a lot of the dreams and aspirations that I think our customers have and our colleagues have. So getting that chemistry right is really important. So that's what I want to leave with, which is it's an exciting place to work. Banking is a great place to work, but Citizens is a fabulous place to work, and we really, really care for those outcomes of customer success and employee empowerment. So that's what I really want to do with this conversation.
Thank you for taking us on the journey.
Awesome.